On the morning of January 13th, 2009, an ice storm moved across northern Nebraska and laid 1 3/4 inches of clear ice on everything in Holt County that was not already inside something solid. The power went out at 2:17 in the morning when a transmission line southeast of Atkinson came down under the ice load. By 4 in the morning, 3 more lines were down. By 6, the REA Co-op was telling customers to expect restoration in 7 to 10 days. By noon of January 13th, the roads into the county were glazed sheets, and the county road grader had already put 2 trucks in the ditch trying to get out to assess the damage. Cal Dempsey had 400 head of Angus cross cattle in 3 pastures on his 480-acre operation north of Atkinson. 400 head need roughly 12,000 gallons of water a day in January. 12,000 gallons. They need it every day. A cow that does not drink in the cold will not eat, and a cow that does not eat in -8 degrees Fahrenheit burns through her body condition the way a candle burns, fast and irreversible. You cannot catch up. The day she loses in January, she carries into calving season in March, and you find out in calving season exactly what you should have done differently in January. Cal's water system was 3 electric submersible pumps, 1 in each pasture, installed in 2003 when he had upgraded the operation. Modern units, reliable in normal conditions, heated pump houses over the wellheads to prevent freeze-up, automated float valves in the stock tanks. He had paid $4,200 per installation, $12,600 total, and the system had worked without a problem for 6 years. All 3 pumps were dead by 7 in the morning on January 13th. No power, no water. He stood in the north pasture at 7:15 with the temperature at -6 and the wind moving at 22 miles an hour out of the northwest, and looked at his heated pump house, standing silent and useless, and then looked across the pasture to the one thing on his farm that was still moving, the windmill, the old Aermotor 702 that his father Raymond had installed in 1961, the one Cal had tried to pull down in 2003, the one Raymond had asked him not to pull down in a conversation that Cal had not fully understood at the time and understood completely right now, was turning in the northwest wind, its 18 galvanized blades catching the same wind that had coated everything else in ice, its sucker rod working up and down in the well casing 42 feet below the frozen ground, its 3 to 5 gallon per minute output filling the 800-gallon stock tank at its base with water that had not stopped flowing since 1961. The tank was not frozen. The constant inflow from the pump kept the surface moving. Moving water does not freeze at -6. Moving water is what keeps cattle alive in a Nebraska January when everything electric has gone dark. Cal looked at the windmill for a long time. He looked at the cattle in the north pasture already moving toward the tank. He looked at the 2 dead electric pump houses in the south and east pastures where 260 head were going to be without water by afternoon. Then he went inside and called his father. Let me tell you about Raymond Dempsey, because you need to understand the man before you can understand what he kept on that farm and why. Raymond was 77 years old in January of 2009. He had retired to the house in Atkinson in 2001, when his knees and his hips had made the daily cattle work a negotiation between his body and his will that his body was beginning to win. He had handed the farm to Cal that year with the specific kind of handover that happens when a father trusts his son completely. No conditions, no ongoing oversight, just the deed and the keys and the knowledge that Cal was capable of running what Raymond had built. He had told Cal two things when he handed it over. The first was about the windmill wrench, long-handled adjustable crescent, rawhide loop on the handle, hanging on the nail on the left wall of the machine shed. He had put it there in 1967, when he moved the original wrench from the barn, after the barn reorganization. It had not moved since. He told Cal where it was and what it was for and how to adjust the sucker rod packing if the pump started to lose pressure. He told him once, and then told him again, not because Cal hadn't been listening the first time, but because Raymond understood that there are things you tell a person twice, when the second time might be the time it matters. The second was about the windmills. There were 3 of them at the handover, 1 in each pasture. Raymond had maintained all 3 his entire farming life. He climbed the towers himself until 2000, when Cal had taken over the annual maintenance at Raymond's insistence, and even then Raymond had been on the ground talking Cal through the service from below. Our brake adjustment, fan blade inspection, sucker rod packing replacement, gearbox grease. Cal knew the procedure. He had just stopped believing the procedure was necessary. "Don't pull the windmills," Raymond had said. Cal had said he wouldn't. He had meant it at the time. Then 2003 had come, and with it the decision to modernize the water system, and with that decision a specific conversation about image that Cal had not forgotten and that Raymond had not raised again after it was over. Let me tell you about that conversation, because it is the reason the windmill on the north pasture was still standing on January 13th, 2009. The contractor installing the new electric pump system had asked Cal, in Raymond's presence in the machine shed, whether he wanted the windmills removed as part of the project. The contractor could pull them for $300 apiece, cut the towers, haul the scrap, clean it up. Cal had looked at the 3 windmills visible through the machine shed door and said, "2 of them, yes." Raymond had looked at him. "I'll keep the north pasture one," Cal said. He looked at his father. "It's original, 42 years old." He paused. "It looks like what it is." "What does that mean?" Raymond asked. Cal had chosen his words with the care of a man who is saying something he knows will not be well received. "Dad, when people come to look at cattle or come out to check on things, 3 windmills in 3 pastures says we're farming like it's 1965. He paused. "I want to keep the one because," he looked for the right word, "it's historical. It fits. But 3 says something different than 1. Raymond looked at him. He said, "3 says we have water in 3 pastures if the power goes out." Cal said, "The electric system has a backup generator circuit." Raymond said, "Does the generator start at -10? The generator was a pull-start portable unit that Cal kept in the machine shed. He thought about -10. He said, "It starts." Raymond looked at him. "How many times have you started it at -10? Cal did not answer that. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Keep all 3. He said it quietly, not as a fight. "Please." Cal looked at the windmills, then at his father. He said, "I'll keep the north one, Dad. The other 2 are old and they need work, and the towers are getting rust at the base." He paused. "1 is enough for historical." Raymond had not argued further. He had walked outside and looked at the two windmills Cal was going to pull down, and then looked at the north pasture one, and then gone back to the house. He had not mentioned it again. The contractor pulled the south and east windmills in April of 2003 and hauled them for scrap at $300 apiece. $600 and 6 decades of water security gone to the scrapyard. The north pasture windmill stayed. Cal serviced it every spring the way Raymond had taught him, not because he believed it was necessary, but because Raymond would have known if he hadn't, and Cal was not the kind of son who stopped maintaining something his father cared about just because he privately doubted its value. By 2008, the windmill had been on that tower for 47 years. The original fan blades were still there, one of them patched with a bolt repair from a 1988 hailstorm. The gearbox had been rebuilt once in 1994 by a windmill service company in O'Neill. The sucker rod packing had been replaced 4 times. The pump itself was the second cylinder in the well. Raymond had replaced the original in 1983. Everything else was as it had been in 1961, still catching the Nebraska wind, still moving water, still filling the stock tank at its base the way it had filled it since before Cal was born. On the morning of January 13, 2009, it was the only water source on the Dempsey farm that was operational. Let me tell you about the physics of this, because the physics are the reason the windmill could not have been replaced by the electric system in this specific situation. And understanding that reason is the difference between a son who learned something and a son who just got unlucky. An electric submersible pump requires 3 things to operate: electricity, an unfrozen pump housing, and an unfrozen pipe from the well to the stock tank. When Cal's system failed on January 13th, it failed on the first requirement: the electricity. The heated pump houses had held the pipes unfrozen because they had been running since October. The moment the power failed, the heaters in the pump houses failed. At -6 degrees Fahrenheit, with a 22-mile-per-hour wind, the pipe from the pump housing to the stock tank, 30 feet of 1 1/4-inch polyethylene, would freeze solid within 4 to 6 hours without heat. Cal had not measured that timeline precisely. He had not needed to. By noon of January 13th, he could hear the difference when he tapped the south pasture supply pipe. Frozen solid. The windmill worked on different physics entirely. Its pump cylinder sat 42 feet below the ground surface, below the frost line for Holt County, in ground that maintained a constant temperature of approximately 52 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of what the air above it was doing. The sucker rod connecting the surface mill head to the underground pump ran through the well casing, which was packed with expanding foam insulation at the surface where it entered the ground. The water coming out of the pump was 52-degree groundwater. 52-degree water moving at 3 to 5 gallons per minute into an 800-gallon stock tank keeps the surface of that tank moving and prevents surface freeze even at -6. But the windmill did not need electricity because it drew its energy from the same northwest wind that had laid ice on the power lines. The wind that killed the electric system was the same wind that kept the windmill running. The harder the wind blew, the more water the windmill pumped. On January 13th and 14th, with the wind at 20 to 35 miles per hour, the windmill was producing at the upper end of its capacity, close to 5 gallons per minute, 300 gallons per hour, 7,200 gallons per day. The north pasture held 140 of the 400 head. They needed approximately 4,200 gallons per day in those temperatures. The windmill was producing 7,200. The surplus ran down the overflow pipe into the second tank on the east side of the windmill. By noon of the 13th, Cal was running cattle from the south and east pastures across the frozen ground to the north pasture to share the only working water source. Moving 260 head of cattle across glazed ice in -6-degree weather while hauling feed to keep them calm is not a small operation. Cal had his hired man, a neighbor's son named Travis, who had come over on foot because the roads were impassable, and his own 2 feet. They spent 8 hours getting the cattle consolidated. Travis asked once why they didn't just haul water in a tank trailer. "The tank trailer is in the south shed," Cal said. "The road to get it to the south pasture is a 40-degree slope, and it is currently a sheet of ice." He paused. "And if I got the trailer out there, where would I fill it? I can't get to town. The windmill is the only water we have." Travis looked at the windmill turning in the northwest wind and did not say anything else. Let me tell you about the call to Raymond, because it is the center of this story. Cal called his father at 7:45 in the morning on January 13th, standing in the machine shed trying to warm his hands, having just confirmed that all 3 electric pumps were dead and the north windmill was the only operational water source on the farm. Raymond answered on the second ring. "Power's out," Cal said. "All 3 pumps are dead." Raymond said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "North pasture windmill is still going?" "Going fine," Cal said. Raymond was quiet again. Then he said, "Where's the wrench?" Cal walked to the left wall of the machine shed. The nail was there. The wrench was on it, the rawhide loop over the nail head. Oh, where Raymond had put it in 1967 and where it had been every day since. Cal had not needed it in 8 years of farming the place. He had known exactly where it was because Raymond had told him twice, and because some things you remember even when you think you will never need to use them. "Left wall," Cal said. "Got it." Raymond said, "The packing on the sucker rod is going to be stiff in this cold. If the pump starts losing output, you'll feel it. The tank fill rate slows. When that happens, go up the tower and tighten the packing nut 1/4 turn. Not more, just 1/4. Cal said, I know, you know." Raymond paused. "How are the cattle? I'm moving the south and east herds to the north pasture this morning. Going to consolidate around the windmill until the power comes back. That'll be tight in the north pasture." "I know it will." Cal paused. "It's what I've got." Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should have pushed harder on the other 2. Cal said nothing. "The south and east ones," Raymond said. "When the contractor asked about pulling them, I should have pushed harder." Cal looked at the wrench in his hand. He said, "You pushed." "Not hard enough." Cal did not argue. He said, "I need to go move cattle." He hung up. He went to work. Have you ever done something your father asked you not to do, and then watched the year arrive that proved he was right? Have you been the person standing in a frozen machine shed at 7 in the morning, looking at the wrench on the nail and understanding, not as an abstraction, but as a physical fact standing in front of you, exactly what your father had been telling you for years? Cal Dempsey stood in that shed for a moment after he hung up the phone. He looked at the wrench. He looked at the door of the machine shed where the north pasture windmill was visible through the glass, turning in the northwest wind, doing what it had been doing since 1961 without any power from any grid, drawing its energy from the same storm that had taken everything else down. Then he went to work, because the cattle needed water, and the only source was a 47-year-old machine on a 30-foot tower. And Cal Dempsey was the only person on the farm who knew how to keep it running. Let me tell you about the 11 days, because the number is important. The power in Holt County came back on the morning of January 24th, 11 days after it went out. The REA Co-op had promised 7 to 10 days and had delivered 11. Because the ice damage to the transmission infrastructure was more extensive than the first assessment had shown, and the repair crews from 3 counties were working in conditions that made progress slow and dangerous. In those 11 days, the North Pasture windmill produced approximately 79,200 gallons of water. It did not slow down. It did not require a service call. It did not ask for a replacement part from a distribution center. The packing on the sucker rod loosened slightly on day 4, as Raymond had predicted it would in the cold, and Cal climbed the tower on a morning when the temperature was -8 and tightened the packing nut 1/4 turn with the wrench from the nail. He was back on the ground in 12 minutes. He had 400 head of cattle in one pasture for 11 days. It was crowded. The hay consumption was higher than normal because stressed cattle in a new environment eat more. He went through 14 round bales he had not budgeted for at $48 per bale. That was $672 in unexpected feed cost. He priced out alternatives. A water hauling service out of O'Neill had quoted $4 per 100 gallons delivered to the farm, subject to road accessibility, which they could not guarantee. At 12,000 gallons per day, assuming they could get through, that was $480 per day, or $5,280 for 11 days. In January 2009, the roads were not accessible for the first 3 days, meaning the actual hauling cost for the period of need would have been $5,280 for 8 days, plus however much he could improvise for the first 3, assuming no losses to dehydration. He did not pay $5,280. He paid $672 in hay. The difference was one windmill that his father had installed in 1961 for $340, and that Cal had maintained for 8 years at an average cost of $80 per year in parts and 3 hours per year in time. When the power came back on January 24th and the electric pumps were thawed and restored over the following 2 days, Cal moved the south and east herds back to their pastures. He checked the cattle condition across all 3 groups. The consolidated herd had some crowding stress, some fence damage from animals pressing at the new perimeter, and slightly lower average body condition than he would have wanted going into calving season. Not catastrophic. Manageable. He had not lost a head. Not one animal had died from dehydration in 11 days of no electric power in -8-degree weather, because one windmill had kept turning in the northwest wind and filling its tank at 3 to 5 gallons per minute, exactly as it had been designed to do in 1961. If you want to know what Cal said to Raymond when he drove to Atkinson on the day the power came back, and what Raymond said back, subscribe to The Honest Farmer. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Tell me if your family ever had windmills and what happened to them. Cal drove to Atkinson on the afternoon of January 26th, 2 days after the power came back, after the cattle were back in their pastures, and the electric pumps were confirmed running, and the fence damage was repaired. He drove the county road that had been a sheet of ice for 11 days and was now gravel again under the retreating ice, past the power poles with their new splice hardware still gleaming on the repaired transmission lines. He parked outside Raymond's house and went in. Raymond was in the kitchen with the farm paper. Cal sat down across from him. Raymond looked at him. He waited. Cal put his hands flat on the table. He looked at his father. He said, "I should have kept all three." Raymond looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at Cal. "I know. I tried to tell you they were old, and the towers were rusting. They were old." Raymond looked at him. "Old is not the same as useless." He paused. "I should have made you understand the difference between what something looks like and what it does." His voice was even, not accusing. "I knew what those windmills were. I did not explain it well enough that you could see it the way I could see it." Cal shook his head. "You explained it. I didn't listen." Raymond said, "A man who tells his son something the son doesn't want to hear carries some responsibility for finding the right words." He picked up his coffee cup. "I said, don't pull the windmills." I didn't say why in a way that made the why as clear as the wind going down. They were quiet for a moment. Cal said, "I'm putting the other two back up in the spring." Raymond looked at him. He nodded once. "2 new towers," Cal said. "New Aermotor heads. I called the company in O'Neill." He paused. $1,800 installed apiece. Raymond nodded. He picked up the farm paper. He said, "Get the same model. 702. The parts are interchangeable with the North Pasture one." Cal said, "I know." He stood up. He looked at his father. He said one more thing. He said, "You told me where the wrench was twice." Raymond looked up. "The first time I thought you were being thorough." Cal looked at the kitchen wall. "The second time I thought you were being repetitive." He paused. "The second time was for January 14th at 3 in the morning." He looked at his father. "I understand that now." Raymond said nothing for a moment. He put the coffee cup down. He said, "Your grandfather told me where the wrench was twice, too." Cal looked at him. "When he handed me the farm in 1961. Raymond looked at the kitchen window. "He told me once, and I said I had it. He told me again, anyway." He paused. "I never understood why, until I had to use it in a blizzard in 1968. He looked at Cal. "And then I told you twice." Cal stood at the kitchen table for a moment. Then he said goodbye to his father and drove back to the farm. Let me tell you about the spring of 2009, because that is where the story closes. The new windmill towers went up in April. Same model as the North Pasture one, same Aermotor 702 head, same 8-foot fan wheel, same sucker rod cylinder setup at the well depth in each pasture. The O'Neill Company installed both in a single day. Cal was there the whole day, watching the installation, asking questions he had not asked in 2003 when the electric pump contractor was doing the work. He asked the installer about the fan blade maintenance schedule. He asked about the gearbox oil change interval. He asked about the packing replacement frequency and what to watch for before the packing needed service. The installer looked at him. "You've got the one on the North Pasture already," he said. "The Aermotor that's been running since '61, that's mine." The installer looked at the north pasture windmill visible across the pasture, still turning. Then he looked at Cal. "What did your father tell you about maintaining it?" Cal told him what Raymond had told him. The installer nodded at each item. "Correct," he said. "Your father knew what he was doing." He paused. "Most people don't keep them running that long. 62 years on the same gearbox rebuild is exceptional." Cal said he never let it go a season without checking it. That's why it's still running. The installer looked at the 2 new towers going up. "These will run the same if you treat them the same?" Cal nodded. He had already decided that. He had put 2 new nails on the left wall of the machine shed, one for each of the new windmill wrenches, same model as Raymond's, long-handled adjustable crescent, rawhide loop on the handle, ordered from the same company in O'Neill. 3 nails on the left wall, 3 wrenches. When Raymond came out to see the new installations in May, he walked the south pasture first. He stood at the base of the new tower and watched the fan wheel catch the May breeze and turn, and heard the sucker rod begin its work, and watched the first water come up through the pipe into the tank. He stood there for a while without saying anything. Then he walked to the machine shed. He went to the left wall. He looked at the 3 nails, the 3 wrenches. He ran his hand along the handle of the original wrench, his wrench, the one he had put on that nail in 1967, and then looked at the 2 new ones beside it. He did not say anything about it. He walked outside and looked at the 3 windmills in their 3 pastures turning in the May wind. Cal was watching from the machine shed door. Raymond turned around. He said, "Your grandfather would have approved." That was the whole conversation. They walked back to the house, and Raymond stayed for supper, and they talked about the cattle and the spring grass and the price of hay and the calving numbers from March, which had been better than expected given the January crowding stress. They did not talk about the windmills again that evening. There was nothing more to say about them. The windmills were running. They were going to keep running. The wrenches were on the nails. The packing would need service in the fall. Some conversations end when the thing that needed doing gets done. And subscribe to The Honest Farmer for more stories like this one. Stories about the machines that work when everything requiring a grid goes down. About the fathers who say a thing twice, not because they think their son did not hear the first time, but because they know the second time is for the day the first time will be needed. About the sons who are embarrassed by the old way, right up until the old way is the only way left. Hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, did your family have windmills? What happened to them? Were there 3, and did somebody pull 2 of them down? The 3 windmills are still on the Dempsey farm. Cal's son is 17 now. Last spring, Cal took him to the north pasture and showed him the maintenance procedure on the 1961 windmill. The brake adjustment, the fan blade inspection, the packing check, the gearbox grease. He showed him where the wrench was on the nail. He told him once. Then he told him again.